It's really a pleasure to be here. It's been a pleasure to be in England. We have many friends here, my wife and I do. And we also have really enjoyed the weather. As native New Yorkers, I'm telling you, this was not a winter. But I'd like to begin, and I am going to keep this brief because the value in this for me is to hear your questions. Last September, I was invited by Paul Volcker, the former head of the Federal Reserve in the United States, one of the most respected economic figures in the country, to a conference in Salzburg, Austria. That was under Chatham House rules. It was an off-the-record conference. And Volcker essentially wanted advice from a group of us about what to do with the rest of his career. He was forming a foundation and wanted to know what he should focus on. And a great deal of it of the advice he got, and a great many of the talks that we heard had to do with polarization of the American electorate. And there was one very striking one by a representative from the Pew Foundation, which does some of the best, most accurate, most comprehensive polling in the States. And since this data is on the record, I could tell you about it. Alan Murray, who is the director of the Pew Foundation, former Wall Street Journal columnist, had two slides. One was the political attitudes of the American people, and it was a standard bell curve. There was a little bit on the left, an awful lot in the middle, and then a somewhat larger tail, maybe 15, 20% on the right. Then he put a slide over it, which was attitudes of elected officials in Washington. And it was an inverse bell curve with a larger group on the left, a very tiny group in the middle, and a large group on the right. And so the most important thing that you should know is that the partisanship that you hear so much about in the States is a dysfunction. It is a disconnect between the American people, their politicians, and, I hate to say it, their media. This has been coming on for about 50 years. It is, Nelson Polsby, the brilliant late political science professor at Berkeley, once said that the problem with America is that political science professors got their fondest wish, which was ideologically coherent political parties. Up until the 70s, the parties were coalitions. The Democrats included Southern Democrats and Northern big city machines. The Republicans included Northeastern liberals and Main Street Republicans from the Midwest. And so people had to talk to each other. In the 60s, and with the advent of computers, what we call gerrymandering, which is the drawing of district lines, became far more of a science and to a certain extent a scam. One of the things that liberals in America don't like to talk about is that the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which is one of our proudest achievements, also had in it a provision for majority-minority congressional districts, especially in the South. And so you'd get a situation like Georgia in 1990, where the legislature turned Republican at that point, and the state legislature redrew the district boundaries. Up until that point, there had been, I think, 7 Democrats, 4 Republicans. After that, there were 7 Republicans and 4 Democrats. all the Republicans were white, all the Democrats were African American. The members of Congress who were white or who had mixed districts or who had to appeal to people of different points of view were eliminated. And that has happened very gradually in the states. There are the beginnings of an outcropping of a reaction to that now. Thank God for Arnold Schwarzenegger. In California, redistricting has been taken out of the hands of politicians and put in the hands of a nonpartisan or bipartisan commission. And that's one of the things I'm going to be looking at more closely this year in 2014 is the nature of the congressional delegation from California once this election is over. But in any case, since the mid-'60s, and with greater intensity as time has gone on, the extremists in both parties have held the whip hand. That's in part because those with the strongest views tend to turn out in primary elections more so than other people do. It's also because those with the strongest views contribute the most money for television ads, which became very important over the last 50 years. And they came to dominate the Congress. There are also traditional reasons. For example, I mean, our Senate especially is tilted heavily toward the agrarian, the agrarian population, which now represents 2% of the American population. For example, there are more people in Manhattan and Brooklyn than there are in North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, and Montana combined. And those 4 states have 8 senators, and we New Yorkers have 2. And I think like 6 or 7 of them are Republicans. The other thing that helped to heighten the partisanship in the states was desperation on the part of the media. When I was a kid, we had 3 TV networks, and at 6:30 at night, you had a choice between the ABC, NBC, or CBS News. We also had 3 flavors of ice cream at that point. Now we have 1,000 channels of gobbledygook, and you have to fight if you're a news program. You have to fight for audience, and that has led to the same phenomenon you see in the primaries. You have a left-wing cable network, MSNBC. You have a right-wing cable network, Fox News. You have the centrist cable network, CNN, where over the last few years, viewership has just been plummeting, in part because CNN is an incredibly vapid operation, especially, one of the things I really love about being here is watching the news and also when I'm back home watching the BBC World Service. And I would also thank you as a journalist for BBC Persia. I was in Iran during the 2009 elections, and after having spent a day being chased through the streets by the religious police, I went to a friend's house in North Tehran, and the only place that you could get accurate coverage of what happened during the day was BBC Persia. So thanks for that. But the media desperation was a consequence of something else that I think is the most important thing of all and the toughest to deal with. And I named a character in primary colors after it. Orlando Ozio, the governor of New York. I made him the governor of New York because the then governor of New York, Mario Cuomo, was Italian, and he would know what Ozio means. Machiavelli said that Ozio is the greatest enemy of a republic. Ozio is indolence. And what Machiavelli was concerned about was how you keep a republic coherent when it's not at war. And we have had in the States, and I would imagine here as well, the greatest experiment in Ozio in human history since the end of World War II. Nonstop prosperity up until recently. No existential threats to our security, except for the Cold War, which, was a distant abstraction. It was unimaginable that we would actually ever launch on each other. And as a consequence of that, the news and citizenship took a backseat to having a great time in the eternal sunshine of American life. Politics was a distant, tiny little cloud on the horizon, and there were elections that I covered, like 1988, where I could understand people not bothering to come out and vote because the choices were, both sane, moderate sorts, Michael Dukakis and George H.W. Bush, and there really wasn't much of a choice on offer. The consequence is that during that time, the media have become far more sensationalist, especially the TV media, and they become far more atomized because of the new technology. And most people don't have a mediating force to tell you when one side or the other is blowing smoke. Much of the debate over the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, was driven by untruths, things that weren't even in the bill, like death panels, famously introduced by that noted intellectual Sarah Palin, that we're going to determine who lived and who died. Those weren't in the bill. But it has become increasingly difficult to have a serious, proper, detailed conversation about policy in the United States about almost anything, because people aren't interested and because the issues have become increasingly so technical and complicated. And so during that time, the media oversimplified, as I said, but we also lost the habits of citizenship. And it seems to me that we're going to have to figure out how to build citizens again. Citizenship, in my mind, isn't just residency. It's a more active thing. I'm completing a book now about the US military and about this generation of veterans. And it occurred to me, if you look at the political spectrum not as a left-right axis, but a libertarian-communitarian axis, we have slid drastically toward libertarianism over the past 60 years during my lifetime. And the military turns out to be the last, and the veterans, by the way, turn out to be the last communitarian tribe where they value being part of something larger than themselves, where they feel that they have a duty to others in their community, where they feel that they have a duty to the larger community. They feel that they have a duty to be informed. This was especially true in Iraq and Afghanistan, where our military, for the first time, did the things that your military did during the colonial era, which was to govern towns. This generation of military are all volunteers, and a great many of them volunteered on September 12th, 2001. And so they're coming back with a sense of idealism and a sense of, and a desire to do public service. And it occurred to me in the course of covering those wars and embedding with those troops that the values they embodied, and sadly, I mean, both wars I thought were ridiculous. And in fact, I thought the war in Iraq was obscene, and almost every high-ranking member of the U.S. uniformed military agreed with me. But I think that even though the wars were disastrous for the United States and for the region in so many ways, the example of those troops are something that I've been able to take with me and to think about as we try to transcend the partisanship, which to my mind has been largely a function of the diminution of citizenship and the lack of interest in the complicated public issues that are before us. So we're going to find out a lot this year about this. This is where I'll close. I'm going to go home in 3 weeks and start traveling through the South, where the Tea Party is put up a range of candidates challenging establishment conservative Republicans. We'll see how they do. From what I'm sensing back in the States is that the tide may have crested and it's going to begin to fall off. On the Democratic side, Democrats are very smug because they believe that the demographics will favor them into the future as more and more, as the United States becomes a majority-minority country, which I think is very short-sighted. And it also assumes that the Republican Party will remain as absolutely stupid as it's been in recent history. But for now, we're looking at a Congress that will have 1 or maybe 2 houses that are Republican, and we're looking at a presidential system where the favorites, where the balance will tilt toward the Democrats for the foreseeable future. And with that, I'll be happy to take any of your questions and tell you why what I just said won't be true.